We all know the famous stories of Snow White, Rumpelstiltskin and Cinderella. Because of two men we all recognize these famous names. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, two German brothers who worked together and made themselves one of the most successful authors to ever exist. We are going to tell you a little bit more about them. We talk about their life cycle, their influences then and now, and we will give you a brief summary of some of their most famous stories.
Jacob Ludwig Karl Grimm was born on the 4th of January in 1785. His brother Wilhelm Karl Grimm was born on the 24th of February in 1786. Both men were born in Hanau, Germany. Their father, Philip Wilhelm Grimm, was a jurist and was married to the daughter of a castle city councilman. The woman was called Dorothea Zimmer, later on Dorothea Grimm. The Grimm family initially consisted of 9 children, but 3 of them died in infancy. In 1971, the family moved to Steinau and obtained a high status within the community due to their father's job. The 2 brothers attended private school at first, but later on attended public schools. In 1796, their father died, plunging his family into poverty. They had to move and the boys needed to take responsibilities that were not suited with their age. They did get to go to the Friedrich Gymnasium in Kassel thanks to the financial support of their aunt. They worked hard and both graduated. Jacob in 1803 and Wilhelm in 1804. After that, they both went to the University of Marburg, where they were inspired by their law professor, who awakened an interest in history and philology, which made him turn to study medieval German literature. Sadly, Jacob was forced to quit his study to support his family. He started to work as a librarian, and Wilhelm soon started to work there too. The library in Kassel is where they started collecting folk tales. In 1812, they published their first volume of 86 folk tales. Their works became widely recognized and they received honorary doctorates from Marburg and Berlin. They took employment at the University of Göttingen. Jacob worked there as a professor and head librarian, and Wilhelm as a professor. In 1837, King Ernest Augustus demanded oaths of allegiance from all the professors of Göttingen. The brothers refused the pledge and they, along with other professors, had to leave the city. They were jobless and thus forced to borrow money from friends to work on their story collection. In 1840, they were offered jobs at the University of Berlin and were no more jobless. Meanwhile, they kept writing and publishing new works and they became very successful. After the brothers retired, they started to work on the history of the German language. Wilhelm died of an infection in 1859 in Berlin. Jacob became very reclusive because of Wilhelm's death. He worked on the history of the German language until he himself died in 1863.
The brothers Grimm's most famous book was Kinder- und Hausmärchen. This book was not that popular at first, but its popularity grew with each edition. At first, they were criticized for not being that amusing to children. In fact, the original stories they wrote weren't meant for children at all. The tales included sex, violence, and even incest. People from around the country, however, wanted to read these gruesome books to their children. Because of that, the Grimm brothers kept rewriting their books until their books were okay to be read to a child. Well, at least to a certain extent. And their stories turned into absolute bestsellers. They got greatly inspired by folklore. Because of this, their book was popular all over Europe. Some people even claim that their famous book was only outsold by books of Shakespeare and the Bible. This obviously shows that their stories were immensely successful. After 7 editions of the book, one of the brothers died, which made the other brothers stop writing. The book included 211 stories. Beside these tales, the brothers also worked together on a dictionary of the German language. Unfortunately, both brothers passed away before this was finished. They got up to the letter F. In Nazi Germany, people were obligated to have their book. Later, in Allied-occupied Germany, the book was banned for a little while.
Walt Disney enjoyed the famous story of Snow White so much that it became his first movie. This shows that the Grimm brothers' stories remained popular long after their death. With this movie, Walt Disney created a name for his animation company that eventually grew into the Disney we all know today.
Belle, what's it mean? Beauty. I'm the perfect combination of brains and booty.
Besides Snow White, Disney also used the Grimm brothers' stories of Sleeping Beauty, Rapunzel and Cinderella. Also, the movie Princess and the Frog has been based upon The Prince and the Frog, also one of the stories by the Grimm brothers. Besides that, almost everybody recalls the stories of Red Riding Hood, Rumpelstiltskin and Hansel and Gretel. The tales have been rewritten a lot of times to suit the current language and are being read to little children. We all grew up with the big storybook and we all begged our parents to read those fairy tales to us. The stories can not only be seen in movies and in books but also in cartoons or theater. The Grimm brothers is also featured in a lot of series. The most obvious example is The Grimm. Also series such as Once Upon a Time feature a lot of their tales.
We will now tell you about the 3 most famous stories by the Grimm brothers and how disturbing they really are. Number 3. Little Red Riding Hood. We are all familiar with the story of Little Red. Grandma is sick, so Red is going to visit her with a basket full of fruit. Mother told Red not to stray from the path, because that could have dangerous consequences. When Little Red arrives at her grandma's, she notices that her grandma was different in a sort of way. She notes that her grandma has bigger ears and huge teeth. That isn't her grandma, but the big bad wolf who ate her grandma. Luckily enough, a lumberjack came in just on time and saved the day. The Grimm brothers, however, changed the real story to make it less vulgar. What is the real story? The original was written by a French novelist named Charles Perrault. In his version, there is no lumberjack to save the day. No, on the contrary. On Little Red's way to her grandma's, she is deceived by the wolf and she eventually gets eaten too. Charles's moral to the story was to never trust strangers. Moreover, there is a newer version of the story by Roald Dahl in which Little Red Riding Hood shoots the wolf and turns him into a fur coat.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Number 2. Cinderella. Cinderella is famous for her glass slipper. After she flees from the ball and loses her slipper on the way out, the prince finds the slipper and rummages the whole kingdom to find a future wife. All the young maidens get to try on the slipper, Cinderella's stepsisters included. The sisters are very obsessed with living a royal life and therefore want to marry the prince. In the Disney movie, the sisters have 2 big feet and they try their hardest to fit in the slipper, but they don't succeed. Not long after that moment, the prince finds Cinderella, the slipper fits, and he asks her to marry him. In the Grimm brothers story, the stepsisters don't just give up. No, they cut parts of their feet to make them fit in the slipper. That's some bloody business, and I'm glad Disney left that out.
Number 1. Sleeping Beauty. You can say that the original story of Sleeping Beauty is rather disturbing. Again, that story was written by Charles Perrault. In the story the Grimm brothers made, Aurora was kissed by a handsome prince who thereby broke the sleeping curse, and after that they lived happily ever after. Now, let's talk about the other version. A prince does come, but he doesn't just kiss Aurora. No, he impregnates her, and she is still asleep. Not to mention that the prince actually is a king and already married. So, Aurora is pregnant and after 9 months she gives birth to twins, while still under a sleeping curse. The babies still need to be fed, so the nurses let the babies go to their mother. One day one of the babies sucked on Aurora's finger and that made the flax needle come out, after which the curse was broken. The king's wife is furious when she finds out what her husband did, and she orders the cook to cook the twins and then serve them to the king. The cook can't bear to cook the baby, so instead he cooks 2 baby goats. The queen doesn't give up and invites Aurora over by means to throw her into the fire. The king, however, is just in time to rescue Aurora by throwing the queen herself into the fire. Aurora falls madly in love with her rapist.
Okay.
And since the king threw his wife in the fire and now needs a new one, they get married. The only thing that does correspond to the Grimm's mother stories is that they live happily ever after.
In short, it's very clear that the Grimm brothers have been important figures for a very long time, and they still are. They started the fairy tale hype that is still going strong. They changed the lives of many people by their interesting storytelling, which caused people to remember these classics. Walt Disney wouldn't be this successful without them. A lot of people wouldn't be if you look at how many use their stories in their own. Our childhood wouldn't have been full of all those wonderful thoughts and happy memories without their stories. Amusement parks as the Efteling would have an almost empty fairy tale forest without these brothers. The list goes on, all because once upon a time there were 2 brothers.
One day, one of the bears...
Hou eens even op! Ik heb honger, dus ik wil straks lunchen.
Ik krijg het er niet uit.